afternoon and welcome back to the Prince for the PrinceCast. I'm Michael Medeiros, and joining me today is one of our columnists, Brendan Carroll.
Hello.
Today we'll be discussing two issues that have been featured in the opinion section over the past week and a half or so. The first was actually a column by Brendan about the Supreme Court and what it means to say that there's a diversity of views on the Supreme Court. The second issue that we'll get to afterwards relates to an article by Professor Grafton from the History Department, in which he said that Princeton has less of a culture of conversation and intellectual debate outside of the classroom than other universities, and that might be responsible in part for the decline in fellowship winners from Princeton. But anyway, to get back to the first issue, Brendan, I know the background, the impetus for this article was that there's a new Supreme Court nomination process coming up, and it looks like one of the main candidates is Elena Kagan, a graduate of Princeton. Why don't you tell us what you learned about her during your research process?
Well, I learned that she worked at the DailyPrincetonian while she was at Princeton. She then went on to attend law school, became Dean of Harvard Law School, is presently Solicitor General for the United States, and is considered on the shortlist for Obama's picks for the Supreme Court, along with Diane Wood, Merrick Garland, some other candidates. One issue which I wasn't able to get to in my column because it was short was the question of whether or not her sexual orientation, which as yet is a subject for debate on online blogs and in comments boxes and newspapers around the nation, would have any effect on her views on the Supreme Court. Elena Kagan has never said that she is lesbian, and I don't think anyone with any serious credentials has ever suggested it, but it is nonetheless the case that a lot of online commentators have been rumouring it. There was a blog at CBS, I believe, which made the issue live again within the past month, but that was taken down after the blogger admitted that he had no strict evidence to support his claims.
Well, your column was also, just to give listeners who might not have read it a background, largely about diversity and what it means to say that there's diversity on the Supreme Court, diversity of views and of course, gender and race. And do you think in general that having more genders, having more races adds more to the Supreme Court? And if so, does having more sexual orientations, regardless of Elena Kagan's orientation, what would that add to the court?
Well, one thing that I was trying to get at in my column was that there are different ways to slice diversity, and for example, everyone on the Supreme Court presently has a Juris Doctorate, so they're already a strange group of people by the standards of most Americans. And in particular, their legal training is becoming increasingly restricted to mostly Harvard and Yale Law School. What sort of diversity you want will be fueled by why you think you should have diversity, if diversity is a goal that is worthy of pursuing itself, which I think is a debate that needs to be had because there are strong viewpoints on both sides. You could say that whether or not Scalia is an Italian-American or whether or not Justice Thomas is black has nothing to do with whether or not they can adequately apply the law to cases and make just decisions. Then there's the alternative view, which goes that this is irrelevant, that, for example, as Charles Blow argued at the New York Times, it's not a question of why do we need more women on the Supreme Court, but why not?
Right, and do you think, along those lines sexual orientation add something, or?
That's just another way of slicing diversity. You can slice diversity according to socioeconomic background, you can slice it according to race, or religion, or philosophical views, or jurisprudence, or political voting habits. There are lots of different ways you can slice it. Some of these diversities are inherent, for example, race. Some of them are changeable, for example, religion.
Great. Well, let's move on to our second topic for the day, Professor Grafton's article and the responses to it. For those of you, again, who may not have read it, in Monday's Princetonian, Professor Grafton argued that perhaps one of the reasons why Princeton has had fewer, Rhodes Marshall winners over the past years is because there's less of a culture of conversation and intellectual debate among students at Princeton. So the first thing we were talking about earlier was the difficulty in evaluating, whether one university has less of this culture than another university. And I know you shed some light on this based on what you said about your high school experience.
Yeah, I certainly feel that in my high school there was an awful lot more serious intellectual conversation going on outside the classroom than I find there to be at Princeton. I can't quite explain why I think that is. There's no particular reason why it should be higher or lower at one school rather than the other.
Do you think that people are spending more or less time on homework and schoolwork, Princeton versus your high school?
I feel like in high school I had to spend much more of my time on schoolwork. It was much more of a rushed and intensive thing. I do feel like at Princeton extracurricular activities are overwhelming in the sense that it's so difficult to get people to arrange to meet at a particular time because somebody's going to have dance rehearsal, somebody else is going to have play rehearsal, somebody else will have to show up at the Prince to do a PrinceCast. And it's extremely difficult to get five Princeton students to sit down in the same room if they try to plan a week in advance.
Right. And along those lines, one of the things that Tim Noonan, a Princeton graduate currently at Oxford, I believe, suggested in a follow-up column in Thursday's paper was that what we need to do to encourage more conversation is set up more spaces that are conducive to conversation. For example, he listed the terrace green room, I think, as one of the places where conversation happens on campus, crucially with alcohol. So what do you think? Do you think future architectural designs, as he argued, should incorporate more such spaces? Or do you think that intellectual conversation can happen anywhere? It's just a matter of the people getting together.
Yeah, I think it can happen anywhere. I don't think you can build the alcohol into the architecture unless you're constructing a tap room. And I don't see any reason why the other 9 eating clubs couldn't serve the same function that he claims Terrace served for him. I do think things like the Princeton Society of Fellows do an excellent job of fostering conversation, and I imagine that alcohol is a useful lubricant towards that end.
Well, today also, for those who may not know, Newman's Day, April 24th. 24 beers in 24 hours for those 21 and over. Do you think that's conducive to intellectual debate?
No. There comes a limit. There's a point at which it stops being a social lubricant and starts becoming a social obstruction.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you for listening to today's PrinceCast. We hope you'll join us again next time, and good afternoon.